All right, so we're going to start a couple minutes early for those who are joining online. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. My name is Brendan Dunphy. I'm the Director of Trust Compliance with Cyber New Brunswick. And today I will be talking to you about CyberSecure Canada. I'll do a brief overview of CyberSecure Canada, high level, what it is, why it's important, and then I'll be turning the floor over to Derek Lackey from Newport Thompson, a new partner with us, who's going to discuss the Bill 64, which has recently become law in Quebec, and he'll take it from there. So I'm pleased to be presenting today from our grand opening ceremonies here in Fredericton. We also have participants joining online to learn about the privacy legislation in Canada. This session will be recorded. Online participants can ask questions via chat only, please. We have a Q&A session at the end of the session, time permitting, of course. But if there are any questions that aren't answered during the Q&A session, you can always reach out to us at info@cybernb.ca. So let's get started. All right. So first of all, I'm just going to talk about the focus of the trust compliance programs in CyberNB. So our goal, obviously, is to help organizations of all sizes become more secure online and protect themselves from the threats that just seem to not stop coming. The focus of some of the programs that we offer include helping organizations understand and implement cybersecurity controls, whether that be CMMC out of the US if they're exporting into the United States, or CyberSecure Canada here in Canada. We promote best practices in assessing vulnerabilities and threats, and we help organizations expand market opportunities abroad and in Canada nationally. And we connect organizations with certification bodies and accreditation bodies in order to achieve certification and demonstrate to their stakeholders and partners that they have best practices in place. So if your organization is looking to implement best practices in cybersecurity or privacy, we're here to support you every step of the way. You can reach out to us via info@cybernb if you have any questions. All right, so what is CyberSecure Canada? Well, technically today, CyberSecure Canada is classified as a voluntary cybersecurity framework for certification for small and medium businesses. However, there are a few RFPs that have come out this year that require CyberSecure Canada certification, not only for the contract winner, but also the downstream suppliers that will support that contract. It was designed with the following goals in mind: to improve Canada's small and medium organization security baseline, to raise awareness of cybersecurity for all Canadians, and increase consumer confidence in the digital economy of Canada. It is based on 13 control areas found in the baseline cybersecurity controls for small and medium organizations, shown on the slide here. These are the control domains, and they range from everywhere from employee awareness training, ensuring your employees understand the risks associated with their roles, enable security software, ensuring your devices are protected from malicious code and anti-malware solutions. And it's important to mention that with the Bill 64 that has been passed as law in Quebec, organizations will be required to report incidents, cybersecurity incidents, sorry. And not only that, they will be expected to demonstrate how they responded and provide proof of how it was handled. And of course, Derek will provide more information on that when he presents. So getting started is very easy. CyberNB has an online tool set that demonstrates what's required for certification and kind of guides you through step by step in order to implement these controls. And this is actually the same tool set that certification bodies in Canada use to assess your submission. So by going to our website and clicking the Get Started button under CyberSecure Canada, it'll direct you to our online portal. From here, you can register your organization, and it'll clearly outline what you have to implement and what evidence you have to gather in order to achieve certification. So once you get registered, you'll be presented with a series of statements. The reason we call them statements is by clicking that implemented radial button there, you're basically saying that the statement is true that your organization has considered purchasing cybersecurity insurance and it has coverage for incident response and recovery activities. So you'll also notice that there is a required evidence section in the statement. So this is actually what the certification body needs to see in order to say, yes, this organization meets compliance for baseline control 1.3 as displayed on the screen here. And for this statement, it's asking the organization provide its cybersecurity insurance policy certificate or the rationale for not purchasing insurance. So in this example, I just wrote, cyber insurance policy certificate attached, and you can see that the link is there as the cyber insurance policy, and the little green check mark just indicates that it's passed the malware scan. You'll also notice that the submit for certification at the bottom of the screen there is grayed out. So in order to achieve cybersecurity certification for CyberSecure Canada, you have to actually complete all of the 51 statements that are required in order to achieve compliance. So once you've completed all 51 statements in the portal, you just click that button will light up and you'll be able to submit. So there are 13 controlled domains, but each domain may have 1 to 8 controls per domain. So it adds up to 51 controls in order to demonstrate compliance. And once you click that submit button, you will be contacted to select from one of the 4 accredited certification bodies in order to achieve certification. So these organizations are managed service providers that have been trained and accredited through the Standards Council of Canada through ISO 17021. These organizations are, of course, Bulletproof Solutions, CyberSecurity Canada, SourceTech IT, or WASEC Cyber Risk Management. So once you're ready for certification, you will have the option of selecting one of these 4 certification bodies and have them review your certification in the same online portal that I was demonstrating in the previous slide. And once they've gone through, they'll either issue your certificate for a 2-year period or ask you for clarification on controls or more evidence to achieve compliance. And every step of the way, there is help available. This is just a small list of some of our partners, but there is a vast network of managed service providers that are trained in CyberSecure Canada, very capable of helping you, everything from a consultation all the way up to implementing all the controls on your behalf and even submitting all the evidence on the portal for you. So there's help at every step of the way. I also like to mention that coming soon, the federal government of Canada has developed e-learning modules for CyberSecure Canada. So they are completed. They're just going through the comms restrictions with the federal government of Canada right now, but they will be released very soon. And they're going to help organizations understand how to implement these controls, what's required, and the best thing about them, they're going to be absolutely free and available to the general public. So now I have the pleasure to introduce our partner guest speaker today, and I'm going to have to check my screen here because his credentials are quite long here. Derek is the Managing Director of Newport Thompson, a data protection and privacy trusted advisory firm based in Toronto. He has more than 30 years of marketing and advertising experience. He is focused on data protection and privacy and the effect on the brand. The author of Castle Compliance, a marketer's guide to email marketing to Canadians, he looks to simplify the implementation of new data management practices with organizations. He is very active in the privacy community, chairing the Guidance Committee, Canadian Advisory Council, GDPR, co-chair IAPP Toronto Chapter 2020-2021, committee member of the ISO 31700 Privacy by Design for Consumer Products, the Seneca JTC 13 on cybersecurity and data protection, and the new Standards Council of Canada's initiative, Data Governance Standardization Collaboration DGSC, as well as being a committee member on the CIO Strategy Council's Privacy Part 1 Qualification and Proficiency of Privacy and Access Control Professionals Initiative. So that's his long list of credentials. So I'm going to welcome Derek to the floor now, and he'll take it from here. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you and welcome. This can be a pretty dry topic. Reading laws, if I hadn't been an ad guy most of my career, I probably would have been a lawyer. So here I am at the intersection of marketing and privacy. But I chair the Response Marketing Association for Canada. And in that capacity over the last 11 years, I've seen the privacy come in like a freight train, data protection and privacy. The signs were early when we passed Castle in 2010. The signs were early that we were going to start legislating in the digital area. And in May 2018, the GDPR came along, and that really was a game changer for all of us. So what I'd like to do is just walk you through the changes. Let me just make sure I can move the slides forward. It's not working. That's okay. Just a space bar good enough?
That's right.
All right. So it's easy to think that Bill 64 is for Quebec, but it's actually not. It's for Canada. Because if you think about it, implementing a privacy management program, you can't have one for Quebec and one for the rest of Canada. Just like in the States, you can't have one for California and one for the rest of the states. So Bill 64 and Quebec have taken the lead, like they did in 1993 with their original privacy legislation, which created 6 years later PIPEDA, which is our federal law here in Canada for the private sector. So there are two national laws. One's called PIPEDA, that's private sector, and one's called the Privacy Act, and that's for government. So I just want to be clear that if you think this is just Quebec, it is not. If you have any Quebecers in your database at all, and if you do business in Canada, I'm going to assert you do, a Bill 64 applies. So here's what we're going to cover. I'm not going to read through this, but this pretty much covers all the elements of the law, that obligations, I'll put it, that we'll have as businesses in Canada. And I love what they did. They're coming into force in 3 stages. Next September, 2 things are coming into force. I'll walk you through them. The following September, most of the law comes into force. And then 3 years down the road, the final piece comes in, which is the data portability piece. So I'll walk you through in the order that they're going to come into force. And, you know, in this presentation, I've also made some recommendations for each area of what you might start to consider now. Because if you think about it, the first coming into force, the first 2 pieces are only 9 months away. So, and I guarantee if we look at GDPR and Castle, we're going to wait till 3 months before and go, what do I have to do? And I promise you, most of the professionals in this business are going to be swamped at that point, and it's going to be hard to get help. So you might consider starting to plan early, and what they're asking you to do for this September isn't that erroneous. So let's walk through. So it actually impacts 21 different acts, and the 2 I'm going to focus on today, or really the one, is the public sector or the Private Sector Act in Quebec. It's called the Act Respecting the Protection of Personal Information in the Private Sector, and we refer to it as PPIPS. Okay. If you look at the 21 laws, 19 of them, they're changing ands and a couple of statements, and they're just cleaning up a little bit of language as it applies to privacy within those laws. But on the Private Sector Act and the Public Sector Act, Public Bodies Act, it's called. That's the government one for Quebec. Those are the two that have been impacted greatly, like rewritten. And I want to say this is very GDPR-like, and in some ways it's actually tougher. So how many are familiar with the GDPR? Okay, so in some areas, and I'll get into them, I'll give you an example. Consent. Under the GDPR, the private sector has really three options. You've got consent, contractual, and you have legitimate interest. And most direct marketing, as we know it, takes place in the EU under legitimate interest. Quebec left that out. Quebec only has consent, contractual, and two exceptions for research and study. So it's kind of interesting that they left out the most useful for a business form of consent. So I think this is going to be way tougher to implement against than the GDPR was for businesses in Europe. At the end of the day, we talk about compliance, and while compliance is important and risk management in business is important, the bottom line is we haven't taken care of our customers the last 20 years digitally. I think we came into if you think back to the 90s, we all had in marketing and advertising, we had a mass marketing mentality. More is better. It's all about eyeballs, number of eyeballs. And so all the senior marketing people who went forward with digital and called the shots as to how digital rolled out marketing wise, they trained the people for more eyeballs because that was their mindset. Well, digital, as we find out 20 years in, it's not about eyeballs. Digital is about engagement and then scaling it. It's not about advertising for eyeballs. I had somebody on a call. I was conducting a class for U of T MBA students a couple of nights ago, and one of them said, well, we do our brand marketing with using digital. And I said, well, you should stop that because all you're doing is ticking people off. Advertising still works. It hasn't gone away. There's still billions spent on television and newspaper and magazine, and some have moved online, but for the most part, advertising in your feed on social media and getting text messages annoys us. So, you're paying money to annoy your customer. So do your customers trust you? I'm going to assert today, given the last 20 years, they don't. And we need to earn that back. And we need to earn that back by treating them with respect. And that's what, get this, we're all in business and we're all out to take care of the customer. And yet we need legislation to tell us we have to. Because that's really what all these new data protection laws are. It's a minimum bar for taking care of your customer. So I don't want to get on a soapbox, but I had to make that point. So it's as much about taking care of your customer. Okay, so as promised, stage one coming into force in September 2022. The appointment of a privacy officer. I love what they did here. The highest authority in the organization. So they don't care if you're not for profit, private sector. So for most of us in our business, the CEO is your privacy officer. The CEO can delegate to somebody else, but the CEO is always accountable. This tells me they are going to find some CEOs right out of the gate next fall. And I'll show you what they're going to find them for, but they're firmly putting the highest authority in the organization on the hook. Okay? These slides will be available to you after, in case you're panicking. So, the privacy officer must be made clear in the footer of your website of who you can contact and how to contact them. So they're basically saying no more games, no more, burying it in a privacy like Facebook does, like a privacy policy that's thicker than Macbeth. No more. And written in a legal language where you're going, what did they just tell me? Right? So everything they're asking for in this new law is to be written in plain language. And the obligations when you're collecting consent are significant. And they want plain language so that people understand what they're agreeing to. Sorry, I go back there. Recommendation, develop and implement a compliance plan within the next 10-month deadline. So I think that appointing a privacy manager is a pretty simple step. But the CEO has to get their head around that they're accountable and they're responsible. And I think that that's going to cause some action. The fines are up to 25 million or 4% of your gross revenue if the privacy commissioner in Quebec gets, really aggressive. Now, we're not seeing those kinds of fines under Castle and the GDPR, but the GDPR has had a couple of $50 million ones. And I think they just had a 200 and some million dollar one with WhatsApp. So the fines are getting up there. I think what's happened with enforcement in the GDPR, and you'll probably see it happen with Quebec, is as they ramp up and begin to figure out what they're going to fine for, it's going to take time for investigations. And most of the big players like Facebook and Google have thrown a ton of lawyers at it. So the DPAs in Europe, every time they ask for something, they're getting a legal roadblock that they have to overcome, and it takes time, and it takes going to the courts and getting what they need. So Quebec wrote in here that the CAI in Quebec, if they ask for something and you don't give it to them, it's a penal offense with up to $25 million. And I think you're going to see them be very aggressive in their enforcement. So I got the order wrong. I apologize. There was one other thing coming into force. Oh, there it is. Confidentiality, they're calling it this, okay? We know this as breach reporting in the cybersecurity world and even in the privacy world for the most part. They're calling it confidentiality incident reporting. So they're taking all of it, privacy and cybersecurity, and they're saying you must report. So you have to build a registry. You have to log every single data incident that you have and how you resolved it. You have to take more seriously the stuff that has a possibility, what they're calling in Quebec, the risk of serious injury. And Pepita calls that the real risk of significant harm. Same idea. Why we're not paying attention to Pepita in this case is it really is unenforced. Pepita is a set of best practices and recommendations, and the privacy commissioner's office are nice, and they help walk corporations through it. Well, they're going to be given in this next wave of change, they're going to be given the authority to fine. So it's going to be one side of the office of the privacy commissioner who is nice and helps you with your program, and there's another side that's going to enforce and handle fines. So again, the registry of breaches and having policies and procedures and having your staff trained is going to be required by September. So you need to put a little incident reporting planning in place with policies and procedures, a brief registry. If the CAI comes to you and says, show me all of your data breaches in the last 2 years and you can't do it, here's your fine. And I don't think there's going to be any leeway. The reason they're bringing this into force first is they're trying to get a handle on what's going on the breaches and where are they coming from. And I think you're going to see similar legislation come in the US because the White House is very much after this conversation as well. Policies and procedures manual. Almost every client we've dealt with over the last 10 years, and we ask for their privacy policy and procedure manual, they go, huh? And it's a requirement under all of these laws, GDPR, Quebec Bill 64, it's a requirement. So you have to have documented policy and procedures. And that's the basis on which you do your staff training. It's a pretty simple idea, but most of us wing it. And they're basically saying if they come in and ask you for your privacy and procedure manual and you don't have one, here's your fine. So again, got almost 2 years, a year and a half to get this done, but it might be smart to start planning out your timeline and just taking these a chunk at a time so that a year and a half down the road, you've got a program in place that's, at least close to being compliant. I'm one of the private sector leading experts in CASL. I've written books on it. I speak on it regularly. I've advised hundreds of companies on how to be CASL compliant. I can honestly say with the lack of enforcement for CASL, when Minister Baines pulled the private right of action, which was the primary enforcement tool, we have not had a single engagement since June 2017 strictly for CASL compliance. That tells me that we don't give a damn about it anymore. Because getting fined by the CRTC, and I've said this to Minister Baines' face, you've got a better shot at winning a lottery than getting fined under CASL by the CRTC. And it took all he had to hold the laughter back. But and he knew for sure I was right. But they don't want to bring the private right of action in because they don't want to piss off business. And it's really that simple. They don't want to make it inconvenient for business. And Quebec said, to hell with that, just like GDPR did, just like the EU did. We have to protect our citizens' data, and what businesses are doing with it is not acceptable. The contextual shift that we're going through in this last 5 years is we used to think when we got people's personal data, it was ours, that we owned that data. We're now beginning to realize we're only a custodian of that data, and we must treat it with respect, and we must kind of look and go, would people think it was weird if we did this with it? And if the answer is yes, then don't do it. Privacy impact assessments are required. So they're basically saying, think this through, folks. So if you have a new product coming online or you're changing a system, you have to do a complete privacy analysis. And there are templates for it, and they're going to give guidance for this and probably more clear regulations. But privacy assessments are going to be a key part of this law because they really want to know that you know and that you've thought it through. Transparency. So this is what I was talking about earlier when you're gathering consent. So they must provide the following information to individuals upon collection or upon request. So when you're collecting the data, you need to state the purpose of the collection, the means of the collection, the rights of access and rectification, and the person's right to withdraw consent. So your language when you're collecting, like on any web forms and anything, you're going to need to include that kind of language. So people know exactly what they're giving you permission for and what you're going to do with it. And your purpose limitations are going to be very clear. Right now, it's add me to your newsletter and you can do anything with somebody's email. And that's going away. If you want to do anything else with that email address, you need to ask permission, consent for that purpose. So it's going to, these new consents are going to be very purpose driven and very focused. We walk a fine line as consultants with our clients between being broad enough to allow you to do carry on business, but being specific enough that the consumer knows what's signed up for. If applicable, if you're passing this information on to third parties, your partners or anybody, you have to be clear. You have to name the third party. You have to name the categories of the third party, which is necessary to communicate the information. And you need to, if it's going outside Quebec, you need to flag that. And there's a whole set of obligations that if your data is going outside Quebec, you need to be responsible for the jurisdiction into which it's going. So it's going into the States, you need to be responsible that our laws in place in the states where you're sending the data that give the same level of protection as Quebec is giving. And the answer is no. So there's going to be some liability when you transfer data outside Quebec and don't pay attention to the jurisdiction and the local rules where you're transferring it to. Profiling, geolocation, and identification technologies. I love this one. This is what I call the Facebook clause. So Facebook does geolocation profiling without your knowledge. It's buried somewhere in a privacy policy, as I said earlier, thicker than Macbeth, and nobody reads those. And the GDPR and Quebec have taken the position that if they don't know what they signed up for, they didn't sign up. So no more of this legal cover your ass attitude. It's like, call it out. Consent. The age of minority is 14 and under. The important issues here must obtain express consent to use sensitive information. And sensitive information, they're going to give a more clear definition of what that is, but it includes things like gender, sexual orientation, political lean, health information is sensitive information. Believe it or not, credit cards not, which always astounded me. Under the GDPR, credit cards not sensitive information, right? I would think that would be the most sensitive, but consent must be clear, free, and informed, and given for specific purposes. And like I said, you've got two choices under the law in Quebec: consent or contractual. And contractual isn't a free-for-all. So just because somebody buys product X from you doesn't mean you got permission to promote X, Y, and Z. You have to ask for that. So the consent or lists are going to go from the millions to the tens of thousands, but they're going to be engaged lists. And I promise you, on the other end of it, you're going to look and go, we were wasting a lot of money on people who didn't even give a damn about us. But we felt better because we had bigger numbers. It's not about eyeballs, it's about engagement. And these laws are going to force us to realize that we've been wasting a lot of money reaching people who don't care about us and are never going to care about us. How many know privacy by default? Anne Kavukian. She's basically developed 7 principles. The GDPR is privacy by design is part of GDPR. It's part of Quebec's law. Our federal government decided not to make it part of Bill C-11 when they just tried to change PIPEDA, which failed. Last November, they introduced Bill C-11, and because of the election and all the stalls in Parliament and the government's lack of commitment to change, they had consent be the cornerstone, and they had 33 exemptions. So, and one of the exemptions was if it's too hard to get consent, it's okay. From what I read of Bill C-11, had it passed federally, Facebook and everybody would have been able to keep on doing everything they're doing today with data, and would not have been restricted at all, because the lawyers would have found one of those 33 exemptions and found a way around it. Some strict rules around automated processing. So this is for like credit bureaus and banks who make decisions on mortgage. If it's a fully automated process, you have to be really transparent with the consumer, how it works, how the decision's being made, and based on what criteria. And there's a whole level of transparency required if you're going to have automated. In the GDPR, they don't allow it. They say there must be a human intervention somewhere in the process. Quebec has allowed it, but there's lots of rules around automated processes. Cross-border transfers. Again, this is an area they're going to be tougher than the GDPR. They're going to be like crazy about data going out of Quebec. Outsourcing. Again, there's like the GDPR, there used to be this going on. Oh, it was their fault. And these laws are saying, like, we don't care, we're going to fine both of you. So if it's your supplier and you don't have a proper agreement to hold your supplier accountable, you're as much at fault. So third-party agreements and outsourcing and standard contractual clauses are going to become a big deal again here in Canada. They have been the last couple of years in the EU. You're going to have a retention and destruction. One global company that we dealt with about 4 years ago, they've been around for about 21 years, pretty strong global player, lots of online sales. I said, what's your retention strategy for data? And they go, we keep it forever. And I think, if we're all honest, we all kind of, like, delete data? Like, really? Nobody wants to delete data. It's like throwing a CD in the garbage. None of us want to do it, right? It's hard you can throw a piece of paper in the garbage like that, but throw away a DVD or a CD, it's like there's just this, and we have that with data. So the new laws are all saying you have to, when you collect the data, tell them what you're going to do with it and how long you're going to keep it. Pretty simple level of transparency. De-indexation right. This could be a little controversial for people like Google, but you have the right to de-index under certain circumstances. I think if you've been legally charged and found guilty and it's been made public, I don't think you can get that de-indexed, but things on your record that you don't necessarily want to be attached to after a certain period of time, you can have it de-indexed, including all links to it. And then stage 3 coming into force is data portability right, which simply means if I'm doing a business with insurance company A and I want to move my file to insurance company B, they have to have everything in interoperable files so that company A can give my data to company B at my request. And the insurance company and the banking industry and the financial sector have resisted this. They have their own way of keeping and storing data, and it's all, fingers never leave my hands, so that when you ask to be transferred, it doesn't translate to the other company's systems. They're saying enough of that. There needs to be interoperability. Give the consumer a chance to make their choice. Enforcement. There's administrative monetary penalties, there's penal offenses, and there's a prior right of action. So I thought Gordon Ladner Gervais did this chart, and I thought it was it covered it so well I didn't need to do anything but show you their chart. So for each of these things, this is what you're likely to get fined for, and some of them are penal offenses, some are just monetary penalties, and some involve the prior right of action. And there is a prior right of action, and it's who knows? Who knows if it's going to actually come into force? But you know, Canada's not very big on tort law, right? U.S. love it, but Canada is like a little worried about frivolous lawsuits and tying up business and making lawyers rich. So again, avoid unhappy customers. Change your privacy and data protection practices now. So, questions? Yeah. Yeah. No, no, it is blanket. It is all organizations. And unlike the CCPA in California, who said you have to be doing $50 million or keep 50,000 records, so they excluded small business. Quebec didn't. It applies to everybody. Yeah. Yes.
Talk a bit more about what qualified and there could be situations where customer just don't know.
Yeah. So something as simple as an email where you've exposed blind CCs and you've exposed the 20 people's email address, that's a breach. That's a confidentiality breach. That you would have to file and make a statement of what you're going to do to prevent that from happening in the future. So that's the lightest form of what I would call a confidentiality breach. The heaviest is, you know, people stealing data from the company and allowing backdoors, and so, you know, right to the worst part of cybersecurity breaches. So it's going to cover the gamut. They do have a definition within the law, and if you reach out to me, I can actually show you their wording for confidentiality breach. But it's going to cover the gamut. And the registry, it could just be an Excel sheet if you're a small company. But if you're a big company with multiple employees reporting on all different kinds of breaches, you should probably find a way to automate this. We worked with CPA Canada, and they had their own internal, the IT department built a breach registry notification reporting portal. And I'm talking to a couple of tech partners right now about building one for the general public, because most people aren't going to know what to do or how to do it. So we're going to try to automate it with a cheap and cheerful solution that allows you to record all your breaches.
Yeah, the thing which is tricky here is you can report it if you know, but if you don't know, can you report it?
Of course, but if in the process of investigating you, they think you're playing a game and just doing this, yeah, and they've got some kind of proof that you were aware of it and you didn't record it, that's, to me, they put it first. It's the first thing to come into force. That and appointing a privacy manager. So that tells me it's important to them. And we're going to see a lot of fines for people not handling breaches properly. And no more hiding them. No more trying to protect the fact that you got breached in some way or your staff made mistakes and that's why the training and the policy manual is so important, because you're not training people on Bill 64. You're training them on what your policies and procedures are around privacy. That's a big difference. I've had big pharmaceutical companies want me to come in and train their staff on the GDPR. I said, your entire sales force will be asleep in about 20 minutes into the presentation, or they'll be on their phones. They don't want to know about GDPR. They want to know about your policies and procedures as it applies to GDPR, right? Yeah.
Regarding the line of consent, I had in mind 13 years old. So is it different to give it or new age?
It is. So every jurisdiction has a different one. You know, I think CCPA is 16. Europe is 13. They fixed it at 14. So, and I guess that matches the rest of the Quebec laws as well. Okay. I thought I saw another hand in the back.
Yeah, so if I missed that, why?
No, there is a Public Bodies Act, but it's virtually the same thing. So I'm just doing the deep dive on this now. So this weekend, what I did for the Data Collaborative Alliance was the current law online on the G Quebec is the old one from 2007 for both of these laws. And so I had one column that was each section of the law as it currently resides, then list all the changes under Bill 64 for each of those sections, and then write the new text of what the law should look like. Because the government's been so slow to post it, we're posting it through the Data Collaborative Alliance, just so people can see the law as it has currently passed and will be coming into force. And I'm about to go through that process for the Public Bodies Act as well. But from what I'm seeing, aside from access to privacy, which is a big piece of the public bodies that's not covered in this one, everything else is the same. The requirements for consent and all of that, it's all very, very similar. I'll be able to speak more directly to what the differences are by the end of the weekend. Brendan.
Hi. So first of all, the people online can't hear the question, so if you could briefly summarize.
Sure, sorry.
But I was wondering, if you could tell us, how does this new Bill 64 compare to GDPR and the GDPR-esque law in California? Is it more strict? Is it less strict?
So the question was, how does it compare to the GDPR? Is it more strict or less strict? I'm going to say more strict because we don't have legitimate interest to fall back on. That is a big deal. So most business is conducted under legitimate interest in the EU, and Quebec didn't give us that out. So there's either consent, contractual, research, or study. Those are the only 4 options you have. So using people's personal information to reach out, oh, there's one exception to that it's important to mention. Your business title, address, email address, and phone number are not considered personal data. So it's a great out for B2B marketing and B2B business. So as long as you're dealing in a business capacity to a business email, this law doesn't apply. But when you're dealing with consumers, it's full on. And the GDPR comparison, it's as tough, and in a couple of areas even tougher. So, and the fines are just as big. So I think what you're seeing is that GDPR set a new bar globally, and literally country by country, region by region, we're dropping like flies. You're seeing legislation come in. I think the US is going to be forced into this, like a federal law on privacy. I don't think they're going to be able to do it state by state. Yes. It is a variable. They just asked you to think it through for every type of data that you collect and purpose that you're collecting it for. How long do you need to keep it? And then only keep it for as long as you need for that purpose. So that's really what they're after, is they want you to think it through rather than just collect it and never delete it. I guarantee you're going to see companies and CEOs get fined for data they're not even using. Like, this is really an opportunity to really rethink your data governance and your data structures and what you keep and what you use. This is the day of Google gathering everything they can, or Facebook, and figuring out what to do with it later. That is now gone. You have to know what you're collecting the data for, particularly when it's personal data. Yeah.
I have a question from online. The question is, what is the status of the update to PIPEDA, and will it align with Bill 64?
Well, great question. So will the update to PIPEDA align to Bill 64? Bill 64 guarantees it does. So if Bill 64's bar is up here and the federal government rewrites PIPEDA, which they recently tried to do with Bill C11, and it's down here, Bill 64 applies. Quebec's law applies. So what they've done is guarantee that PIPEDA's got to come up here. PIPEDA's got to at least match what Quebec did. And that's going to make the federal government extremely uncomfortable, because they don't want to put these kinds of constraints on business. But the only way to, Minister Baines called Bill C11 a balanced approach. It wasn't balanced at all. The finger was heavy on the scales in favor of business carrying on doing exactly what they were doing. So it wasn't designed to protect people's personal, it was designed to make it convenient for business. Tyson.
How they might create a strategy for your first what do you anticipate is going to happen? A lot of companies that can operate in cloud, massive cloud provider that have infrastructure. Because data going through a cloud provider in jurisdiction that law, or
yeah, certainly Quebec data, for Quebecers, they expect you to keep it in Quebec. But, companies are going to have to just think about what their strategy is for it. Like you say, a lot of companies have reworked their data. So they've opened an AWS instance in the EU, and they keep EU data there so that they're not worried about transferring it back and forth and the liability that comes with that. And it very much, that's built into Bill 64. It was not built into Bill C11. It said nothing about cross-border transfers. And again, heavily in favor of business, not necessarily in favor of people's personal protection. So where we're at with Bill C11 now is, now that the government is reformed and they're back in, I assume it will be a priority for ISED in the next 6 to 12 months of coming back out with, I don't think they're going to bring Bill C11 back. It was so bad. The Privacy Commissioner wrote a document with 60 recommendations for changes to Bill C11. He called it a step backwards in privacy. And no government wants to be seated when we lose adequacy with the EU, with all the trade implications it's got. No government wants to be that government that loses adequacy. So where's the balance, right? And I think Quebec just forced the federal government's hand. And if we look at 1993, it took 6 years from when Quebec brought their privacy law in till federals passed PIPEDA. So how long is it going to take them to change it? We don't know. We've been waiting 7 years. We've been waiting since this government's been in, and they just don't seem to have an appetite for privacy and data protection. And I say that based not on their words, but on their actions. I've been watching closely for changes to PIPEDA for 7 years, and none have been forthcoming. And when they did come forward, it was terrible. If you really dug into Bill C-11, it was terrible. It didn't protect your rights as a citizen in any way. Any more questions? Use me up while I'm here. Yeah.
You mentioned the B2B relationship.
Yes.
So we are looking also at school students and their email addresses provided by school. So is it considered as?
Yes, it is. It is considered personal information because it's personal emails.
That's an email provided by the school.
Actually, oh, I see what you're saying. So your name at University of Toronto, or yeah. You know, I'm not sure, so I'm not going to say one way or the other. I'm not sure if that might fall under the B2B Act, and that be considered not personal information. I think we're out of questions. Any more from online?
Nope, that's it.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Just start. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I'm suggesting to you that you start paying attention and start taking on the first two things, are appointing a privacy manager and having a breach incident reporting plan, including a registry. Those are the first two pieces. You got lots of time on the other pieces, but get those two handled this year.
So first of all, I'm going to thank everyone online for joining today. I'm going to end the recording and you can log off, and we'll see you for our next session.